Okay, I couldn't help myself. I had so much fun making the first two episodes that I was like, screw it, let's make a third one. We're back with another episode of Removed Abilities, where I take a deep dive through League's history to analyze old abilities that were changed or phased out of a champion altogether, explaining the issues and problems they had and why they couldn't stay in the game as they were. At first, I was a bit hesitant to go into too many episodes back to back on this series, but a channel I used to watch a lot was the Duel Logs, and he had a similar series where he went over all banned cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! That spanned almost a dozen episodes or something, and it's one of his best performing and most well-received series of all time. With my first episode climbing to almost 500,000 views, I'm guessing you guys find this to be quite entertaining as well. So let's go through another 6 or 7 more. First ability we'll talk about is one that I'm honestly not sure if it even made it to stable release. If you thought Evelynn Shadow Walk was old, this one is going back to the boomer days. Twisted Fate is arguably one of the most well-designed and well-balanced champions in the entire game. A champion who simultaneously has a ton of versatility while being simple to use and understand. He has 2 trademark aspects to him, pick a card and his amazing ultimate Destiny Gate. We're going to talk about the latter. At the very early stages of Alpha like 2009, TF's ultimate used to only be the first part, Destiny. Now full disclosure, I wasn't around during this time, so I don't know the specifics of what it used to do in the past, but from what people have told me and what I can gather based on footage and descriptions of that time, Destiny was the same back then as it is now, only it applied a very heavy slow to all targets, which is pretty stupid broken, not gonna lie. People tend to downplay how good slow can be in the right situations, but having it on a global auto-targeted activation makes it undeniably valuable for either chasing fleeing targets or running away from them, in addition to revealing the position of the entire enemy team. The real kicker is that the teleport aspect of it was actually Twisted Fate's old E. Yes, Gate, the teleport, was on a basic ability, and it was global. His patch history indicates that despite being a basic ability, it had roughly the same cooldown as his standard ultimate at around 2 minutes at rank 1. But that's kind of ridiculous. Having a global teleport better than teleport since he could blink to any position he wanted, not necessarily to a tower, minion, or ward, would be overpowered in this day and age. The reason TF's Destiny Gate has one of the longest cooldowns in the game is because of how valuable map rotation is. This was on a basic ability with a shorter cooldown and global. Plus, his old Destiny removed Gate's channel time while active, turning Z from a global teleport to a global flash. Twisted Fate might have single-handedly shaped the strict activation requirements on global teleports. It's no coincidence that every global travel ability has a long cast time and gives a very clear warning to the enemy team that they're on the way. I can't imagine starting a team fight and then in a single instance another champion just pops out of nowhere. I'd be too paranoid to even do anything. Continuing on with another super duper old ability, would you believe me if I told you that dodging used to be a thing? I'm not talking about champ select or dodging skill shots, I'm talking a % chance for attacks to miss. Thankfully, RNG elements like these are not in the game anymore. The last thing you want is to lose a 1v1 through sheer bad luck. But at one point, Jax used to have this property. Counter-Strike, the legendary copy pasta, used to be even stupider. Passively, Jax had a % chance to dodge enemy attacks, deadass. Just by existing, he could completely avoid damage. And it wasn't a small chance either. I believe at one point it used to be 24%, that's almost 1 in every 4 hits. If you stack dodge items and runes, yes, those were a thing, Jax could literally avoid everything in the game. So you can picture the absolute bullshit of you getting dove in your own fountain. That alone would have been overpowered, but anytime he successfully dodged an attack, he would inflict an AoE stun to all enemies just like the reactivation of his current one, and it had a trigger cooldown of like 4 seconds, so every 4 seconds, he could stun you just from you missing your abilities. Now it seems like he did have an active since it had a mana cost, but I can't for the life of me find out what it was. It could just be a mana cost for the stun portion activation, but it's very apparent why this was phased out of the game. Luck-based elements have no place in a competitive setting. It should be entirely up to a player's skill, knowledge, and wits. You can imagine the frustration of having an otherwise perfectly thought out plan go up in smoke through no fault of your own. Jax was the living embodiment of that. By mid to late game, he was so overpowered that 1v3ing or even 1v4ing was a common sight according to most players. He's already one of the most frustrating opponents to deal with up in top lane, I speak from experience, and that's how he is now. Counter-Strike basically used to be active at all times, including the stun part. Fortunately though, like Twisted Fate, this was way back in the day when they were still exploring and testing the game, so in their defense, everything was still a work in progress. I just can't believe dodge used to be a thing. You could miss your entire rotation of abilities through bad luck. Also, as a small easter egg, Jax's current passive used to be his ultimate and vice versa, which is kind of funny. Speaking of soft abilities, let's talk about Master Yi. Another old school champion moment. I am not referring to AP Master Yi, although that was a fun time for many of you, I'm sure. I'm going even further back. Before talking about that, since we just went over RNG elements with Jax, did you know that Double Strike, the passive, used to be random chance? You had, I believe, a 20% chance to attack twice with every hit, so if you were lucky, you could attack 10 times for the price of 5. Could you tell it was a very Wild West period back then? I digress. So Alpha Strike and Highlander, his Q and ultimate respectively, were swapped when he first came out. Highlander used to be the Q and Alpha Strike was the ultimate. I mostly want to go over Alpha Strike. Conceptually, it was the same back then as it is now, except it obviously did a lot more damage to account for being an ultimate, did magic damage instead of physical, used to apply slow to all targets say for 4 to 6 seconds, and it used to attack up to 10 targets. Supposedly, it could also attack through invincibility, so he could deal damage to Kale while her ultimate was active, though they phased that out quickly. You can think of it almost like a souped up version of the current Alpha Strike. Being perfectly honest, unlike Jack's and Twisted Fate, this one doesn't come off as absurdly overpowered, especially compared to present-day Alpha Strike. Version 3.10 a few years later would be when they made Alpha Strike what it is today, with the whole cooldown reduction thing and everything. That's also around the time when AP Master Yi was taken out of the game. The old scaling used to be ridiculous, 300 base damage plus 100% AP, and it had a cooldown of 10 seconds. I guess while we're talking about AP Master Yi, Highlander used to be a complete cooldown reset on kill and a half cooldown reset on takedowns. So if he scored the finishing blow on a target, he would press Q again instantly after, and again, and again, and again. Whereas versus current Yi, there's about a 1 to 2 second window of time you have to counterattack him before he gets that chance. I wonder though, could he have been less degenerate of a champion if Alpha Strike was still his ultimate, or would he be even worse? The world may never know. Okay, we're gonna stop digging through buried fossils for now and talk about something that I actually witnessed firsthand and admittedly abused the hell out of, Volibear, one of the best visual gameplay updates in history. Although compared to Poppy, Nunu, Pantheon, and whatnot, Voli's original version wasn't that bad, especially after that tiny mid-scope update they gave to his abilities. The one in question I want to talk about is Majestic Roar, a contender for the most criminally underrated ability in the game. Prior to said mid-scope, it used to just do a splash of magic damage to all enemies around him while slowing champions or fearing everything else. It was a pretty underwhelming ability that only served to deal chip damage, but then they gave it 2 new properties in version 8.4 where it would apply a small knockback to enemies and deal bonus damage to anyone who is airborne via any form of displacement or dash. While very short, only about as much disruption as getting hit by an Aatrox Q sweet spot that turned it from a near worthless bit of chip damage to without question one of the best disruptions in the game. Even if it's for only 0.000001 seconds, displacement is still displacement. It can interrupt channels, stop dashes, set up Yasuo ultimate, all that stuff. And what made it even more effective was that Majestic Roar had no cast time, it was instant. Overnight, Volibear went from a lame stat-checky bruiser to Riven's hardest counter, instantly making him an S+ tier champion in my book. The bonus damage was also pretty good, especially after they made it max health damage. Any champion who relied on a dash or some quick movement to get in on you, Jax, Pantheon, Riven, Irelia, Renekton, Quinn, Rengar, Camille, Fiora, Shen, Wukong, Jace, Akali, if you reacted fast enough, you could instantly shut down their engage while punishing them since their dash animation counted as being airborne, therefore proccing the bonus damage. The effect radius was pretty generous too, 425. He only got to enjoy this change for about a year before his full rework, but it was an excellent demonstration of how a small change can make a world of difference. Of course, it was a bit too good. I know Poppy's steadfast presence is also instant cast, but Volibear was a juggernaut with a lot of dueling power and survivability, so Majestic Roar being a frame 1 knockback made him almost too good at fighting people in top lane and jungle, so I understand why they took it away. I wasn't exaggerating when I said Volibear became Riven's biggest counter overnight. Unless you were bad, you literally could not lose this matchup, it was so free. Alright, we have 3 more to go, and this is a pretty minor one, but I thought it would be worth mentioning. Vagar. Vagar has the same kit he always had, but it did go through a few tiny changes over the years, no pun intended. Vagar actually used to belong to the anti-mage archetype, which at present only consists of Galio and Cassidy, I think. Basically, he was explicitly designed to be more effective against AP champs, having 2 abilities with this property. The first being the first iteration of his passive, Entropy, where he would steal 20% of every nearby champion's ability power and add it to his own, although the amount stolen per target couldn't exceed 5 times Vagar's level. But this meant he could theoretically get up to 90 AP per champion for a total of 450 if everyone on the enemy team was a mage. That's pretty cool, not gonna lie. If the enemy team has a Vladimir top, Elise jungle, Fizz mid, and some AP support like Sona, just by picking Vagar you would hamstring all of them by slashing 1/5 of their AP. Forget adding it to himself, just being able to reduce enemy ability power doesn't sound too bad, but then again that makes him hyper-situational. The other anti-mage ability was Primordial Burst. Prior to the mage update midway through Season 6, Vagar's ultimate had a very interesting scaling metric. It was still a point-and-click nuke that had good base damage and AP scaling, but rather than dealing more damage based on the target's missing health, it used to also get stronger based on the enemy's AP ratio. So against AD champs it would do a decent amount of damage, but against AP champs it could very easily one-shot them if they also had like 500 AP. Now the challenge is obviously getting close enough to use it on them, and we all know Vagar doesn't have very long attack range, but he could turn the enemy team's ability power against them. While not as notable compared to the ones we talked about above, I felt like it raised a few interesting questions over champions designed specifically to counter other champions. We have Rammus and Malphite for anti-auto attacking, and the aforementioned Galio and Cassidy. All the same, those are tanks and anti-carries, whereas Vagar is a mage, so maybe it wouldn't have been as practical. Moving on, Karma. Karma's old W to be exact. Another not so pronounced ability with a curious premise to it. Current Karma's W forms a tether between herself and a target enemy champion, which, if it manages to hold, roots them in place, and if she mantras, it heals for a huge amount of missing health and roots them for 3¼ seconds at rank 5, the longest non-ultimate hard CC in the game and the second longest overall behind Ash's Enchanted Crystal Arrow, a very strong ability in its own right. The old version used to be quite different though. It's still a tether, but she could use it on an enemy or ally for different effects. If it's an ally, both she and them gain bonus movement speed for up to 5 seconds or until the bond breaks. If she attaches herself to an enemy, they take damage and are slowed instead of sped up. Furthermore, any champion, whether ally or enemy, who walks in between them is guaranteed the same movement speed buff or debuff for 3 seconds. Essentially, Karma and whoever she tethered to became a walking Jace acceleration gate or deceleration gate. Frankly, it's kind of an underwhelming ability since all it really does is speed up or slow down, and even though I pointed out how underrated slows are, I don't think tempo alone is good enough to be an entire ability. Between the two, Focus Resolve and Renewal are much better than Spirit Bond. True, in select instances, Karma's Spirit Bond is Silver's ultimate on a basic ability, but I feel like this was taken out and reworked for simply not doing enough. There needed to be a bit more attached to it. Now, if on the other hand it functioned like Tarek's Bastion where she could echo her abilities onto whoever she's attacking, that's a different story. Or something smaller would work too, like if all enemies who pass through it take the same damage that she deals to an enemy on cast, or if all allies who walk through it get bonus attack speed or some other buff besides just movement speed. She used to heal and shield already with her old Q and E, but I think Spirit Bond was in need of a bit more than just what it had. Last but not least, Zac. Zac's a very fun champion, well designed too. But during the Vanguard update, the same patch that took away Maokai's Vengeful Maelstrom, they replaced Zac's ultimate with an entirely new ability too, before reinstating the original one a couple years later. It had the same name, Let's Bounce, but with an entirely different effect. The current ultimate has them literally bouncing around and dealing damage every time he lands, while knocking back and stunning all enemies the first time they get hit. Disbursement crowd control can be hit or miss at times. If positioned correctly, it can be used to knock enemies towards you, kind of like how Gragas does with his ultimate. Or it can have the adverse effect of knocking enemies away from you and causing your teammates' skill shots and whatnot to miss. So they wanted something a bit more productive and came up with this. Zac squishes down and unstoppably channels for up to 2.5 seconds, slowing all enemies standing on top of him. On recast, he jumps in a target direction and drags all caught enemies with him as well. Try to picture Azir's ultimate, only he is the ultimate. It's kind of weird. I like the concept. It has a very clear goal in mind and can work decently well for setting up wombo combos, but the reason it doesn't work in practice is that enemies can just dash out of it before he jumps, since it has a long channel time, especially if you want to jump really far. The benefit of Zac's original ult is that it was fast and hard to avoid. This one was extremely easy to see coming, so anyone who could jump out of it or even flash out of it were safe. Plus, it did almost no damage. Zac's current/old ultimate deals a huge amount of damage in conjunction with unstable matter. Could they have made version 2 better? Possibly, but with how rampant mobility is, on-demand disruption has a more pragmatic range of use cases, particularly for a champion who can dive in on the enemy team from a full screen away. Making it so enemies are rooted in place while he's channeling would be too broken, so finding a win-win solution to where it was more consistent while still enabling counterplay was too cumbersome to figure out, hence why they brought back version 1 and Zac has been better from it. Though in hindsight, they could have made it so you were just grounded during the channel, that way if you were closer you were screwed, but if you were far enough away, maybe you could walk out of it. But it was still a pretty gimmicky ability. Alrighty, that's it for today. Believe me, I can make another 10 more episodes on this series, there's too much to talk about. Let me know in the comments down below which abilities you think I should go over next. I'm keeping a list of them, but there might be a few I don't know about, so don't be shy. Request as many as you like. If the series keeps doing well, I see no reason to not make more episodes. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my first 2 episodes if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.